Welcome to this week's episode of Optimal Game State. We've just had the pre-orders for the Leviathan box go up, and every other video I see online has content makers painting their boxes. Not only did I not get a box from GW, I also didn't order one. That's not to say I'm not interested in a new edition of 40k. The hype has certainly had me pulling out my Necrons and Black Templars to work out what I still need to assemble and paint. One interesting aspect of the release I found is the inclusion of the Tyrannic War Crusade book as part of the main rulebook in the box. In 40k, a Crusade book is a mix of a setting, given some background details, and of a conflict somewhere in the galaxy. It'll also have some missions and some scenarios to battle it out, along with some special rules relating to that conflict. In the previous editions, these were designed to add to the core Crusade rules, which is what the narrative campaigns are called in 40k. Now, this isn't a 40k channel, but we do love campaigns. When we talk about campaigns in a multitude of Games Workshop games, we're typically talking about big groups of players who meet up once a month in their local game store to play. Unfortunately, that can be a bit tricky to organise, and when you do manage to get it going, it usually ends up slowly dropping off as people drop out. What's interesting in this regard is that the primary type of campaign that Games Workshop actually produces is the two-player format. Now yes, the main campaign rules for all of their games can be played with any size group, but the two-player box set is their primary big seller, and that usually includes a campaign with it. So with the big Leviathan release, that campaign is going to be Space Marines versus Tyranids. From the outside, this looks like it could be a pretty great experience for two players. There's even a specific planet that the conflict is being fought over, Ogram, and fingers crossed we get to see a little bit more lore and background about it. Realistically, 40k probably isn't the best format for a campaign. Assembling an army is a big investment, and the game will typically take a full evening to play. So you want to try get a relatively fair game. Unlike, say, the faster skirmish games, where you can play 2 or 3 games in a single night, so having one unfair game doesn't really feel that bad. Now, GW are pushing their big online narrative event, which is where, if you get the box, you also have a code where you can report whether the Space Marines or the Tyranids won the battle. It's very cool, but by all reports the box is heavily skewed to the Space Marine victory, just by virtue of the points. I think you could have a lot of fun playing a series of games with this box, where two players both build and paint their army to a certain number of points, then play a game, and up the points for the next game. That doesn't actually need any sort of Crusade campaign rules though. To take another perspective at campaigns, the two bigger recent releases for the skirmish lines were Ashes of Faith for Killteam and the Nightmare Quest box for Warcry. Might and Madness is the campaign book from the Nightmare Quest, and it has a series of linked games with the Stormcast battling against the Flesh Eater Court Ghouls to see who will control the Seraphon Realm Shaper engine. Ashes of Fate takes it even further. This campaign is designed to be placed across 7 games in total, with a mini-game where each side can attempt to control, investigate, or persuade territories to their cause. What I find really interesting about these two-player campaigns, though, is that they're all doomed to failure from the start. Okay, that might be a little bit dramatic, but there certainly is a flaw with them. The basic concept is that winning games gets you prizes. In an event with lots of people, the next round you pair the people who won and you pair the people who lost, so the second round will still be relatively balanced. You can't do that with a two-player campaign though. Often what ends up happening is one player gets the advantage and it snowballs from there with the rest of the campaign. So in this video, I want to talk about a different way of running these two-player games. This actually is a callback to the original Rogue Trader book. All the various Warhammer lines we love have their roots back in the 70s when Games Workshop had a license to print Dungeons & Dragons content. Even when Rogue Trader focused on two-player games, it recommended the addition of a Gamemaster as an arbiter to help things go smoothly. In this instance, I'm recommending going a little bit further and have the GM as the antagonist. So one player plays through the campaign normally, slowly advancing with their team, while the other player essentially plays the enemies they face, with the goal of making the campaign enjoyable and challenging. For the remainder of this video, we're going to have a look at the Ashes of Faith campaign for Killteam, but the lessons here will equally apply to Warcry, Leviathan, or any other campaign that you take a look at. Step 1. Prepare. The Warhammer hobby overall is a very social experience, but it also has solo elements. Much of your time is going to be spent painting models. If we're planning to GM a 2-player campaign, then we can start planning things ahead of time, before we even get around to finding our second player. In this case, the Ashes of Fate box has a ton of Chaos Cultists paint, 23 in total. Depending on how you want to approach this, you could also paint up the hero side for the campaign. I'm assuming the campaign player is going to be using the Inquisition. They might have their own collections that they might want to play with, or you might paint it up yourselves and give them the option to pick from your collection. We also should look at some of the scenery options. There are a number of locations in this campaign that you could try replicate. There's a cathedral, or a refinery, a manufactorum, an underhive, and so on. It does look like GW picked out the locations to fit with their range of scenery they currently offer, so that's pretty nice. Don't forget to detail your cults and the planet they're on, and so on. The campaign does have a lot of this detail already. We know it's set on the world of Exhalus, and it focuses on the city of Deepwell. If you wanted, of course, you could change these details, perhaps changing the planet to one of the ones in the Gilead system, so you could use the Cubicle 7's Wrath and Glory background. You do have a set of cards for locations, which you can randomize, or if you prefer, you could just pick out the ones you like, whether that's because it matches your terrain, or it just feels right. In the book with the cultist rules, you can also find tables for operatives and cult names. Elements like this really help bring the overall story together, so it's good to develop it out a bit. Check out my Necromunda focus video on AI, where we use ChatGPT to help us generate some background. Once you've got everything ready, you gotta make the pitch to your buddy. And during this, it's important to let them know you're going to be shaking things up rather than just sticking to the standard rules. This just sets the expectations so there's no confusion how it's going to play out. As we see later, we're going to be taking some liberties, so it is important we're upfront about it and our buddy knows what they're in for. For campaigns, it's generally best to plan out a regular schedule that works for everyone and have a fixed end date, whether that's an actual date or just a total number of games in the campaign. For Ashes of Fate, the recommendation is 7 games in total, so let's go with that. The most important step is obviously to actually play some games. Campaign book does have an initial mission to play out, which is a great way of doing things. It has the Inquisition team raiding a heretic base. Points are gained for killing and capturing the enemy. In the first game, chances are everyone is going to be getting used to their new teams and the rules in general. I'd be tempted in this game to make things just a little bit easier for the Inquisition team. The main mechanic for the cultists is their mutate ability, where they change from the average humans into terrifying abominations. For the first game, we could actually leave that out, so it feels like the Inquisitors have initially hit one of the low-level parts of the cult. At the end of the game, let the Inquisition player level up as normal in narrative rules, but you don't need to do so for the cultists. The Ashes of Fate campaign does have a funky minigame that you play between games of Killteam. Based on the number of victory points you get cards which then can be used to control, persuade, or investigate areas. It looks fun, and it lets you slowly build up to a final outcome, which is nice. If you didn't manage to get yourself the Ashes of Fate box, which unfortunately I think is probably the majority of people, it's by no means essential. You can still pick up all the cultist models and then just ignore this aspect. Here is the special sauce. This is what makes this format fun. You get to cheat. Okay, not cheat. But as the GM, you need to take some liberties to make the game engaging. That means sometimes you're going to make things easier for the other player, sometimes you're going to make it a little bit harder. We're going to do all of this in the design of the missions and the design of the enemy warband. So we're not going to be fudging dice or anything like that. During the actual game, we're going to be just playing a fun, enjoyable game. For example, there is one Chaos Cultist box that isn't used with the cult, and this comes from the Blackstone Fortress box and was released as a standalone box a bit later. These guys are armed with autoguns, a heavy stubber, a grenade launcher, even a flamethrower. If we were playing a normal campaign, these could never be used. But as we're GMing, they are something that we can add to give the Inquisitor team a little bit more of a challenge. It's just a matter of getting the weapon profile from another kill team and adding it in. Similarly, we can straight up add operatives from other kill teams. If the Inquisition team is struggling, they could get assigned a Space Marine as an extra operative to help out. This is something we always see happen in the books, and it makes for a great way to make things interesting. It might be something to do when we're giving them a particularly hard mission, to try even the odds a little bit. We're also not limited to one kill team as the antagonist. On the second mission, we might put the Inquisition up against the Arbites. A bunch of heavily armed fighters causing mayhem in a part of the city is going to get noticed, and the Arbites may not have been notified ahead of the time of an Inquisitor on the world. It's a great thing about this approach. You get to use all of your toys to craft the story that you want. Now, hopefully the Inquisition team will win some games and lose others, slowly growing until you get to your final game. In a normal campaign, the Cultists would have been leveling up, probably either pushing ahead or staying behind the progress of the Inquisition team. We're completely ignoring all that though, and we're just focusing on making a fun game. So for the final battle, we could do something crazy like throw in a demon, and let the Inquisition have a shot at taking it down. Doing something like this is going to stretch the rules, and it's important as a GM that we're honest with ourselves about what we're doing. That we should be doing this to try and make the most engaging experience for the other players possible. If the Inquisition team keep getting crushed game after game because we've been breaking the rules, then that's not going to be any fun. The goal has to be making the Inquisition the focus of the story. So if they're losing the first few games, then we need to adjust the opposition down a bit. That's not to say that we're going to be throwing games, but we can skew the odds from when the game starts. Ultimately, this is about the player trusting the GM and the GM making the game fun for everyone rather than just themselves. And that's it for today. The basic concept for this is pretty simple and honestly can be summed up in a few words, but it's kind of fun to see what we can do if we step through it. While we have focused on Killteam for this video, this kind of approach can definitely work for any campaign system you have, or even just a one-off. Is this something you'd be interested in trying out? Can you think of anything else we could do to improve the experience? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.